Hi guys, my name is Sky Wipa, and today I'll be discussing The Emissary by Tawada Yoko and asking the question of when is the future and what are we to do about it? American science fiction author Frank Herbert once said, "The function of science fiction is not always to predict the future, but sometimes to prevent it." Tawada Yoko's The Emissary does just that with a slight twist. The twist being a critique of the prophetic nature of science fiction and its distancing from the present by subverting futuristic literary techniques, but more on that later. The Emissary presents near future Japan, still reeling from the effects from an unidentified environmental disaster, acting as a catalyst for a detrimental decay of the country in all senses of the word: decay of natural resources, of language, of connection to the world at large, and of life. The novel follows the narrative of Yoshiro and his great grandson Mume as they navigate this hopeful dystopia, a world where children's teeth fall out like pomegranate pulp, but you can rent a different dog each day to accompany you for some light exercise. Tawada's writing style feels like a fever dream as the conventional borders distinguishing the conscious and unconscious and past and present break down much like the decay of this recently isolated Japan. These binaries become deeply intertwined and warped, manifesting in a world where the old outlive the young threefold, and set in the context of a prior environmental disaster, presents a future where the older generations must live through their mistakes and watch the future they'd wagered would fix it die faster each after the next. Tawada comments on current conventional perceptions of time and this crudely fabricated distinction between future and present as problematic. To see the future this way defines our actions by permitting us to act selfishly today by depending on a more sensible tomorrow led by younger and hopefully better individuals. The emissary reflects that this staccato way of viewing estranges us from what is an intrinsically entangled future by way of language, knowledge, and life in the ambiguity of her conclusion. Simultaneously, Tawada contextualizes this mistake through the most vulnerable and apparent victim of these decisions, the environment. Tawada Yoko forces readers to engage in a way that previously unrecognized in the literature surrounding fiction as foresight, to reconcile our ways of thinking about the future and how that affects our actions beyond the final page. While Tawada utilizes a slew of inherently futuristic themes, namely decay and immortality, the very fact that this takes place in a post-Heisei era so near to our own present forces readers to unfamiliarly confront a future knocking on the back door and wonder how it was able to come so quickly. The emissary grapples with this seemingly innate societal entanglement and presents to readers the consequences of our distancing of the future, an expansive decay of ourselves and the earth. While sitting in her parents' home, Yoshiro's wife Marika contemplates the generations of people whose names she didn't know, whom she'd never cared about, had been born and died there. The sweat of women forced to work like slaves drenched the walls. She smelled the cold sweat of a son who had strangled his bedridden father to get his inheritance. The walls and ceiling that had witnessed these atrocities glared down on her. The umbilical cord binding the generations of a respectable old family is also a rope around the neck. This passage connects the importance of material and human history, its memory continuing to pollute the walls of the house and the feelings and senses of the next inhabitant. This flashback demonstrates that while the temporality of the events has passed, its physical traumas linger, much like environmental pollution after its own production and consumption value have expired. The decay of the house cannot accurately communicate what happened there, but only project onto Marika what the past traumas must have felt like. This parallels the potency of the decay in language, further estranging Yoshiro from Mume and others like him as punishment for past actions. Young people do not comprehend simple English words anymore, and people don't seem to remember that bread is a foreign word. The state censorship of foreign words prevents the younger generations from responding similarly to the elders over this catastrophe in order to simulate a society that still functions well. Simultaneously, Mume is unable to understand suffering, as his pain is a perpetual state of being for his generation. However, it is this ceaseless pain that presents itself as a sort of gift to the youngest generation, enabling him to be free of constantly hoping for the possibility of no pain, leaving him firmly and unbotheredly in the present. In contrast with Mume's perspective on temporality, Yoshiro is unable to let go. Along with the gift of everlasting life, they were burdened with the terrible task of watching their great grandchildren die. Mume's perspective on the perpetual nature of things is a considerably preferable future than that of Yoshiro's constant reliving of past traumas when compared to the present and what the future will hold for Mume. Tawada spends the majority of the novel world building this globally isolated state, disintegrating from an environmental cataclysm and censored by an unseen government to prohibit inflammatory foreign words. However, the emissary subverts common notions of fictional futures that Bina states as to reach a wide audience and thus amplify participation in the debate and reflection of future we want, and her designated final step in its creative input. Tawada's ambiguous ending creates an output, or a next step, by changing the reader from passive to active by working to understand what should come next. Charles Elkins, a science fiction studies contributor, writes that the future is ambiguous for everyone. The difference between science fiction writers and their audiences stem from the realization that although both are concerned with the same issue and although both attempt to express that concern in specific emotions through specific symbols, the science fiction writer can resolve the problem himself by expressing it, whereas the reader can express his or her emotions only after the author has created the appropriate forms. It is this next step for the reader that Tawada stresses in the significance of her ending. Additionally, the fact that Yoshido struggles throughout the book with writing a children's book, as reading about an ideal world wouldn't help the boy change the world around him anytime soon, encapsulates Tawada Yoko's critique on literary future studies and their effect on humanity's notion of the future. Concurrent to this train of thought, Leah Zaidi, a scholar writing on world building and science fiction, writes that a critique of existing scenario output is that too much of it consists of snapshot scenarios, which merely describe the future conditions without explaining how they evolved. That is all to say that we see the future as an abstraction or a projected point in time with different outcomes without clarity on how many steps nor how long it will take to get there, nor its effect on ourselves. When Mume falls over, countless temporal possibilities arise that it is not explicitly stated whether he is dreaming the entire experience with Suiden or a big jump in time occurred simply by artistic choice. Tawada does not clarify our confusion. It is up to us to choose what has happened and how we can move forward. To conclude, Tawada Yoko's The Emissary does something quite astonishing in that it alters the core focus of this course in examining how our readings today might tell us about what tomorrow might bring, a quote directly taken from our course syllabus. The Emissary does not want us to see today and tomorrow as separated by a series of events we must monitor, but rather to see that by envisioning tomorrow estranges us then from acting justly in the moment in pursuit of a different future. The hamartia of humanity is its discounting of the future, with too much of its forward thinking dependent on the success of future generations and decisions to right the wrongs of what will then be the past. Tawada comments directly on the nature of environmental disasters and issues through nations' unwillingness to deal with them. Global protests are gaining unprecedented momentum against persistent inaction from the older generations who will not face the immediate damages it will surely bring. The Emissary intricately imagines a future where this problem is completely flipped on its head, where the current philosophies guiding environmental and political action affect those who care the least the most, and must live out the entirety of the consequences. While the ending at first seems quite dystopian, it remains intentionally unclear whether Mume has died or simply lost consciousness, leaving it to readers to explore an infinite set of possibilities rather than accept whatever end Tawada would have chosen. Ultimately, in a future where much forward thinking has resulted in an environmentally crippled state isolated from the world, Mume and Yoshido represent the extremes of such an experience. However, they intersect in their ability to find hope in any circumstance and command to readers that a life, be it too long or too short, must be lived in the present without over reliance on a quote unquote better future. Circling back to the first quote I introduced, science fiction sometimes is used to warn against the future, but Tawada compels us to re examine when the future will be and how that influences our actions of today. Thank you.